All right, guys. Well, for juniors, this is going to be our last. I know this is frustrating watching me constantly fix my collar. Seeing it on the screen with it all flattened out bothers me. Um, this is going to be our last selection for this unit we're covering, which deals with late 1800s literature. But for us, we talk about it being what caused the death of the American dream, at least the original form. And we're going to look at a story that symbolizes the death of a dream. Let me tell you, new story for me. My expertise is not in American literature by any stretch, although I enjoy a lot of it, especially in this time period. So this was a new one. I'd never read it before. I know of the author, Willa Cather. Never been, someone I really thought much of. Didn't dislike her, didn't like her, just had no feelings at all. I have a new respect for her after reading this story, though. This is a really interesting story. What we have at the beginning of this, and your book does a great job, and we're on page 652, by the way. Your book does a great job of juxtaposing two really contrasting images. Okay. On the right hand side, we've got the title of Wagner Matinee, and that is pronounced Wagner with a V, not even though it's got a W. It's a German composer. So, but you got a Wagner Matinee, which those two of those terms, Wagner, which sounds highbrow, with sorry, I got something on the screen I'm trying to fix. Okay. So you got this highbrow image of, opera and classical music, and then matinee, which is, an afternoon performance, which again feels very upper class. It also has an image of some sheet music right there. On the other side, you have this really bleak looking landscape, a raggedy looking house. It looks like a farm that's not doing well, and this really old, beat down looking woman next to it. And those two things are juxtaposed. They don't belong in each other's world. And that's where we find ourselves in the story, okay? All right, so the story begins with our narrator, who I believe his name is Clark, based on what happens at the end. But Clark is discussing a letter he's received, and then your book wants us to talk about characterization in this section. There's a lot of characters. I've always complained about direct characterization in literature being quite lazy. Let me tell you, I have to rethink that after reading this. Cather does a good job of using direct characterization, but what she does is she uses very odd and very distinct details which make the direct characterization so much more powerful. I've always believed if you wanted to say someone was tall, that's fine to say so and so was tall if you're writing entertainment fiction or young adult fiction. But if you're writing literature, it needs to be worked into something a lot more creative. Well, Catherine's making me second guess myself. So we start out with some subtle characterization. This isn't the stuff I'm talking about. Talks about the letter he receives being worn and rubbed as if it's been carried in a dirty pocket. And then you also get the idea that his uncle who sent this to him, it says he characteristically delayed writing it. So again, characteristically means this is a habitual thing, which again is a form of characterization. We can analyze habits to analyze characters. But then the next couple of paragraphs, Catherine uses some really, really strong imagery. He talks about remembering his Aunt Georgiana. And he says, at once a pathetic and grotesque. Now, that is, those are strong words. If you're going to use direct characterization, by all means, use those level 3 and 4 and 5 words, all right? If you go over to the next page, he continues talking about when he first picks her up. Now, before we get to that, we do see that the first little twist we get here is that the narrator, who now lives in Boston, and seems to have upper, middle, and upper class sensibilities, grew up for a time back on this farm with Aunt Georgiana. So that's when he remembers her figure being pathetic and grotesque, which is really sad. And we know that he loves this woman, something we discovered later in a few paragraphs. He talks about going to pick her up, and here's another instance of really strong direct characterization. He says she looked not unlike one of those charred, smoked bodies that firemen lift from the debris of a burned building. I mean, goodness, that is a horrible, horrible thing to say. But I mean, it definitely is a strong descriptor. So if you're going to use direct characterization in a literary setting, by all means, do what she's doing. That has just as much power as really strong indirect, in my opinion. All right, well, as he picks her up, we get our first twist in the story, which is that Aunt Georgiana also used to live in Boston. In fact, she used to teach at a musical conservatory here, which means she doesn't belong maybe so much in the, because she's from Nebraska now, or she's not from Nebraska, she's living in Nebraska. She doesn't maybe belong in the like poverty stricken, dirt farm Nebraska area that she's been in for 30 years. She really came from this, fancy Boston society, teaching classical music at a school. So, I mean, she was a different person, not what you would expect. Um, you get the background on how she met this guy. And I've got a note in my book from that I personally think, I realize that feminism is a growing movement in the time period that this writing begins here in the US anyway. And women are really fighting for, any sense of equality, any sense of control over their lives. We saw that in Story of an Hour. I think we see it again here. This woman who's got, kind of her life mapped out for her to be a part of, like I said, middle or upper middle class Boston society. She's not a very good looking woman. I mean, we see that from the descriptions before, but here, he describes her as a plain, angular, spectacled woman of 30. So you get this idea that she's not got a lot of choices as far as men go. And she's just kind of maybe frustrated with her life. She's 30, things haven't worked out how she wanted. So she elopes with this guy she just falls in love with for whatever reason. Mainly, it looks like because of physical things. She thought he was, a good-looking guy. He was younger than her. He paid attention to her, and she ran off to, show her family and people that she could be her own person and take some control of her life. Except she gets out there and she again has no control over her life, which is a tragedy. Feminism in this time period, from what I've seen, is really about portraying the tragedy of women, whether they're in low class, middle class, or upper class, just the lack of control in their life. So she gets out here and listen to this description, man. It says they built a dugout in the red hillside, one of those cave dwellings whose inmates usually reverted to the conditions of primitive savagery. Their water they got from the lagoon where the buffalo drank, and their slender stock of provisions was always at the mercy of bands of roving Indians. For 30 years, my aunt had not been farther than 50 miles from this homestead. They move out there, and this is a time period. Again, this is part of that American dream, the early one about, there's resources there for you. You just have to go and get them and put in the work. So this guy who has no money and their family, they go and they mark off their 80-mile homestead that's theirs for basically nothing. But they have no resources to build, so they basically live in a cave that they dig. Not a literal cave, but it's not much different. The description of them drinking water from a lagoon that buffaloes drink from. Notice it's not a lake that deer drink from. Notice how pretty that sounds versus lagoon and buffalo. So you get this image of like abject poverty. They are just dirt poor. This isn't poor like, I can't really go out to eat until my next paycheck. This is poor like, don't know if you're going to get another meal. So that's the life she ends up in. And she's there for 30 years, they say. So then we go back to the present, and he's again getting some direct characterization of her. It says her skin was yellow from constant exposure to a pitiless wind and to the alkaline water which transforms most transparent cuticle into sort of flexible leather. She wore ill-fitting false teeth. The most striking thing about her physiognomy, however, was an incessant twitching of the mouth and eyebrows, a form of nervous disorder resulting from isolation and monotony and from frequent physical suffering. So again, we get this like leathery skin. You get the description of her wearing teeth that don't fit, and the frequent physical suffering. It doesn't necessarily mean abuse, but that could be suggested. It could also just be that she's living a hard life at this point. So we then get a really long paragraph where our narrator is discussing how important his aunt was to him. She saw something in him, and she taught him Latin, and she taught him to play music, and she just really worked with him, which is so funny thinking about this poor woman out living in and they're probably in kind of a house at this point, but anyway, living in poverty, teaching Latin and Shakespeare. It's crazy. But then you get the key line for the entire story, and I want you guys to get good at picking these out. In class, Joe Williams kind of nailed this right away, and that's something I want you all to be able to do. When he says, she says, "Don't love it so well, Clark, or it may be taken from you. Oh, dear boy, pray that whatever you sacrifice be, it's not that." And you got to know that that's just powerful. Remember, authors write everything intentionally, so you got to look at all their words as being meaningful. But this line is really, when we start talking about theme, this is one of the ones where you could use this line to support it. She's basically telling him not, Joe has said, don't take things for granted. And yes, that's part of the element for sure. But it's also the idea of if you, that things can be taken from you. That you can't become obsessed with it because you can lose it, because she's lost it. She's out in the middle of nowhere. And we're going to see that in the when she shows up at the title here is a Wagner Matinee. They're going to go to a matinee of some music by Wagner. And you're going to see in some ways how she still has this attachment to music, but also 30 years of being away from it is kind of distance her from it. And that's sad. We're going to talk about one of the big things I think come out of this as we get closer to the end, and that we're going to bring that back. Okay. So, and again, you're in charge of reading this. I'm just hitting the high points. So we go to the next couple of pages. They're preparing to go to this matinee, and our narrator is really beginning to rethink his choice. He thought it would be a nice thing to do, but now he's like, this may not go well. He's thinking maybe the best thing to do would be get her back on her little carriage and get her back out to Nebraska, because the last thing you want to do is, if she spent 30 years, coming to grips with her life, you don't want to re-expose her to her old life and make her more miserable. But in the end, he decides to take her. They get there. He's a little concerned she's going to be out of place. Ironically, she's not. Physically she is, yes. But this woman honestly could probably have been playing in one of these orchestras at one time. Now she's out there watching with a bunch of people, probably some of who don't even know how to read music. So she belongs there if anybody does. But, sorry, my voice is cutting out. I apologize for drinking on camera. Drinking coffee on camera. Dunkin' Donuts. Anyway, there's sponsored ad, right? I wish. But it says she doesn't really pay attention to this. It says my Aunt Georgiana regarded them as though they had been so many daubs of tube paint on a palette. She's not interested in what the other people think. She's nervous. She's definitely feels, but I don't think it's a nervousness out of I don't belong here as much as, this is something I used to love that I no longer am around. And that here's the real tragedy. She's going to have to leave again. It's not like she's moving back to Boston. All right. Then we get this description of the music actually beginning. He says, these are some important lines on page 659. I first realized that for her, this singing of basses and stinging frenzy of lighter strings broke a silence of 30 years, the inconceivable silence of the plains. So she hasn't heard music like this in forever. She points out that she's heard, the only music she's had is an accordion that occasionally one of the people that work on their farm might have had. So you also get the world there they're talking about out where she lives now in Nebraska is the flat world of the ancients. To the east, a cornfield that stretches to daybreak. To the west, a corral that stretches to the sunset. Between the sordid conquests of peace, more merciless than those of war. Pointing out that what she's used to is not this beauty and this excitement and this, artistic endeavor. She's used to day-to-day hard work and nothing to, help with her mind and, help with, her concept of beauty. Her life is not beautiful anymore. And we're not saying that people that work on a farm are bad people by any stretch, but it's not the life that she wants. And also, it kind of points to the problems of poverty, which is not the point I'm going to get to in this. We talk about poverty a lot in this class. That's not where we're going with this one. We're going to go in a different direction. So I'm going to leave that alone. But you can definitely attack the concept of poverty in this. As the music's playing, you can tell that some of it excites her. Some of it seems to scare her even. It's a really interesting interchange when they're taking a break in between some of the numbers. And she's talking to Clark. She says, and you've been hearing this ever since you left me, Clark? Her question was the gentlest and saddest of reproaches. Now, the word reproach there is like to get on to someone. It's a weird word choice to me. But do you get it, Aunt Georgiana? The astonishing structure of it all, I persisted. Who could, she said absently. Why should one? It feels like she doesn't really like it and she doesn't get it. And, and I don't know really what Cather's doing here. Again, I didn't do a lot of study for this. I'm just kind of pitching you what I did with it. But it feels like she's kind of lost it a little bit. Not up here, but lost that attachment to the music that, she doesn't, it's not riding a bicycle. As soon as you start again, you remember, which by the way, that's a completely bad saying. I learned to ride a bike as a kid. I tried to get back on one a few days ago and acted like I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So, but she also seems to have not had the connection she did. And then the second half plays, and you can tell she's really starting to get into it. She's getting back to her old self. She's closing her eyes. She's just sitting there thinking about it. She's loving it. And then it all ends. And there's where the tragedy comes. Remember, literature's not about giving you a happy story always. It's about giving you a message and about giving you a template for a discussion to say, hey, how can we make lives better for not just us, but for others as well? And that's what this does to me. I'm going to tell you what I think we can do with this in just a minute. But this heart-rending scene where the music's gone off, people are leaving, and she says, I don't want to go, Clark. I don't want to go. And she's crying this. She doesn't want to go back. He says, I understood. For her, just outside the door of the concert hall lay the black pond with the cattle-tracked bluffs, the tall, unpainted house, naked as a tower, with weather curled boards, the crook backed ash ceilings with the dishcloths hung to dry, the gaunt, molting turkeys picking up refuse about the kitchen door. Like she's leaving this world she loves of, higher class, of the finer things, and having to go back to just dirt poor. And she doesn't want to do it. And it ends there. So we don't know really what happens later. And the point is that that's not what this is about. The story is not about Aunt Georgiana. It's about, what happened to her. Okay. Not fiction, entertainment fiction writes about the characters and wants you to know about a story. Literature writes about a message, and this has definitely got multiple messages in it. And one of the big things I teach is that the message doesn't have to be exactly what the author intended. It can sometimes be what you get out of it. For me, and your book even has a question about this. It's question number 4 on page 661 about the importance of artistic outlets for people and what happens when you take that away. We live in a culture now that schools are shutting down these avenues completely. If there's a budget crisis, the first things that go are going to be art programs, music programs, drama programs. Those are going to be gone. They killed writing years ago. Writing is now a skill like math or science. They put it in an English class, and we treat it like that. And you look around my classroom, and I'll have 25 kids, let's say, and I'll issue everybody an essay. And of those 25, 2 or 3 that come back show natural like writing talent. People who may not have enjoyed writing the essay under the time constraints, but enjoy writing. The other 22, just it's like if you force someone to sit in art class and color a picture. That's not right. Paint a picture of a tree, and they don't want to do it, and it's going to come out like you can tell it's a tree, but it's going to be nothing special. And that's the way writing has been done. Now they haven't been able to kick it out like they have art and music, but I mean, those two things are gone. I mean, heaven forbid sports were to be taken away, but we're going to definitely bury the arts. And the sad thing is, and I believe that sports also are a way of conveying beauty. There's nothing better than watching someone who's really good at a sport perform. So I would say that still counts as a way of artistic outlet, because an artist is just someone who's talented at what they're doing, in my opinion, and great athletes are artists, in my opinion. But when you take these things away from people, there's a lot of people that's their only outlet, and to remove it relegates you to this woman's life. 30 years of just getting by and convincing yourself you're okay. Being okay, I think, is one of the biggest tragedies in the world. At least even if you're sad and depressed, and you have an outlet for it, you can make some of the most beautiful music. You can become, you can express that through dance. You can do it through your paintings, and there's something that you've left of beauty for the world. But if you're, mucking out stalls and, plowing corn, that just doesn't provide the same avenue. Yes, those are necessary things. And it's easy to look at those as, well, these are practical, usable careers. People need to eat. People don't need to look at paintings. But I disagree. I really feel like art is an essential thing for us so that we don't end up like this poor woman whose life has become 30 years of misery, and she's just going through the motions. And, while it's tragic that she's sad now, it's woken her up to her situation. Now she's not going to be happy. She wasn't happy before. She's sad. And I know we think about things like our goal in life is to avoid the negative emotions, sadness, anger, and things like that. But sometimes they can be powerful driving factors. And like I said, so many artists, writers, painters have had such deep hurt and pain and produced some of the most beautiful works that have brought joy to millions. So, and helped us kind of process our own feelings and things like that. So for this woman to be stuck in a life that's not what she wanted, it's sad. And of course, we can take a lot with that. We can talk about the importance of, making decisions that best fit you, and not, trying to rebel for no reason like she does. You can talk about, choosing a path that leads you in the direction that you can tell God wants you. There was no doubt this woman should have been working in music, and she ends up being a farmer. That's not what she wanted. There's so many things we can work with this, which makes it, in my opinion, a brilliant piece of literature. That is how is if you can turn it into a lot of different things, and you can really work from it. And I could spend an entire week going over themes and having discussions with you guys about this, all jumping out of these few pages. And that's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it worth studying now, a century and change later, and hopefully centuries from now, people will still be studying it. All right. Okay, guys, well, that will end up our discussion of a Wagner Matinee. Again, you need to read it. This video is not enough Don't be lazy. Part of this the literature we read is the enjoyment of reading it. It's not just talking about the themes. Understand that. So go back over that, look over that, please. Make sure you're ready for it. And we're going to test coming up very soon. So we got a pretty big selection of things. So I'll start working on those and get them ready for you. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Oh, well, it's about to be the weekend here. It was Friday when I'm filming this, thus my less than professional attire. But I hope you guys have a great day wherever you are and whatever time period it is you're watching this. So, all right. Well, we'll see you again soon.